welcome to the Strange Ecologies panel, where we get to talk about some fabulous flora, fantastical fungi, and freaky fauna as well, with such a strange and wonderful group of folk to lead us on this journey. And I'm going to start by putting them immediately on the spot. I'm going to go clockwise so you can prepare yourselves. So I would love you to tell me specifically who you are, what time it is where you are, because y'all, I brought them from everywhere, and what kind of projects you have going on that are your connection to strange ecologies. So starting with George.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is George. I am the studio lead at 3 Cell Studios here in Manchester in the UK, where it is currently 11:04 p.m. It's very dark outside, but I managed to get myself a little bit better lit this time. So I'm the studio lead at 3 Cell Studios. We are working on Mappa Mundi, an exploration and ecology RPG. This is the pre-release guide, but we're getting ready to launch the Kickstarter for Mappa Mundi in February of 2025. And I'm really excited to be here to talk all things strange ecologies with you wonderful people.
Okay, thank you so much, George. Okay, up next we have Candy. Hello. Oh no, you're muted.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, I was like, all the tech in the world can't save us from ourselves.
Yes, exactly. I was trying to save you from my typing, and yeah. Hello, my name is Candy Williams. I am the lore QA lead for Confluence the Living Archive. And we have just under 4 hours left of crowdfunding on BackerKit right now. So if you want to check it out, and it is 4 p.m. here.
And that link is in the chat. Y'all, you have 4 hours to get on the ground floor of this delightful. And if you wait till the end, they only have 3 hours and you'll be sold by then. So just get ahead, do it now. Save yourself the effort. Okay. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Up next, Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm working in the studio called Double Proficiency with my partner Jakub. And you may already know us from the series of primers, which mix up natural history and occult and TTRPGs in a very weird and folklorish way. We like our figs mixed. It is 1 a.m. in Finland right now. We have not seen sun in a very long time, and I already yearn for the spring.
Some people in my chat are saying, is this mycologist friend Anna? Yes, because
Yes.
I talk about you too much. I was like, I have found my sibling. Tragically, she is on the other side of the globe. So, but you know what? Canada, Finland, similar, different font. I will say.
Same
okay.
planet.
We both have moose. So, but yes, if y'all have seen Wayward Autumnal, a lot of the mushroom lore that we draw on in that show is from Anna's book, Mycologist Primer. And they fully funded, but for 2 more days, you can still get in early, get those good Kickstarter prices. Links in chat. Everyone's coming in right under the wire. Okay, and then last but so certainly not least, Adam, hello.
Hi, how's it going? I'm Adam. It is 3:07 p.m. My time. And I'm over at 5GMs. You can find us. We're an actual play. We rotate GMs. We play all kinds of different stuff. It's a great time. Our first game, I think, had some very silly ecology going on because it was a world of floating islands. It was a very fun, very silly. We had sky oranges. And then beyond that, I also work as the head design individual for Advance Armory, where we make 5e supplemental content and are working on some other things like our own RPGs in collaboration with everyone at 5GMs to make stuff that we could bring to our own games. One that I'll probably mention a lot today is we're working on a kaiju-based game. So I'm very excited about because kaiju are interesting.
And I'm here too. So for anyone who doesn't know me, hi, I'm Anne. I'm a TTRPG creator, an actual play producer, gremlin from the internet, an accidental science communicator, because I will never shut up about mushrooms. And if there's one thing, I haven't written an RPG. Sorry, team. But there is one thing I always love doing. It's incorporating those concepts, using games created by people like y'all, supplements, things like that, and incorporating that into elements of storytelling. So for this panel, for everyone, we are live here on Twitch. If you're seeing this later somewhere else, we're not live, but you could have been, come over to Twitch. In any case, so you can ask questions that we will bring to the panelists. We're going to start with some ones that I already have prepared, but by going exclamation questions, you can get to the form to make sure we don't lose you in the scroll of all the wonderful love that's happening in chat right now. I adore y'all. So coming in right off the bat, one thing I think that is really interesting about all the work that y'all do is, would you call your work like fantasy, in the fantasy genre primarily? Because I think it's really interesting, because we think of something like fantasy being like make believe, it's magic, don't think too hard about it, right? But then we're bringing in these like kind of real science elements to it. I know, I think Confluence, you say fantasy sci-fi, where you're like at the intersection of two. I know in the Mycologist primer, it's both factual information right next to like, and also it can see ghosts right next to each other. And I think that's cool. And so my first question for the panel is, when you are creating these worlds or stories that intermix science and fantasy, where is the line that you use to draw between the two? And to what extent do they like inspire and play off each other? And examples are very, very welcome.
So with Mappa Mundi, what we're trying to do with what we do with 3 Cell Studios, our motto and my kind of central design philosophy is the real world done fantastically. So all of our games are either in the real world or set in a version, like a kind of parallel version of the real world, and that's the latter of those two is the case for Mappa Mundi. And so the line between science and fantasy is less kind of well defined. One of my undergraduate supervisors said to me that like all science is magic with an explanation, right? Any sufficiently advanced technology appears like magic if you don't understand how the technology works. And so by using a kind of pan global medieval setting, which is kind of like loosely defined, you're able to incorporate science as a form, sometimes as a form of mysticism, sometimes as a form of cultural memory, sometimes as a form of cultural expression, and the ways in which people understand the world around them can be kind of made slightly strange. And so science is fantasy from a certain perspective, right? And fantasy is science. So, but by trying to keep it grounded in real world mythological creatures, which sounds a bit like tautological, but real world mythology, that you're able to play around with that, that cross between science and fantasy. So one of our regions is based on like South Asia, and we use like Irrawaddy dolphins are one of my favorite animals in the world. Basically blind dolphins live in these silty muddy rivers. And so we've just used Irrawaddy dolphins, but we've just renamed them ever so slightly, named them after a different river, like a fantastically named river. And so I like playing in that space where science is magic and magic is science, but not in the kind of high fantasy, here's loads of magic way, but in just, this is the way a culture understands itself in relation to the world.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Is anyone else?
Yeah, actually, for Confluence, it's very similar to the way George explained, where it's kind of blurry between, magic and technology and all that stuff. So one of the examples for Confluence is we have the MiFi network, MIFI, and it is a mycelium network, which we have, technically in the real world, but we have enhanced it. And so you can actually communicate across the MiFi network. There's actually technology that connects to that network, very much like an internet. But it is only in areas where they have very specific fungus that have the abilities to do that. And so, and one of the other things is that there are specific animals that actually can travel, like basically teleport through that network as well. And so definitely keep the lines blurry on Confluence because it's cool. Like, we've got some really cool stuff, and it's I think it makes it much better if you don't try to stick to one or the other like too much. If you can kind of, marry them a little bit, it just comes out really awesome.
I wanted to say I really like that specifically, and anyone from who's hung out with my chat along knows that like one of my little pet peeves as like a mushroom person is a lot of people when they share their fun mushroom facts with me, they said, "Did you know that mushrooms are the internet?" Is like and I'm like, that's not a fact, that's a Stamets quote. And
what a quote though. What a quote.
I know, and it's like, but I think my autism is like, okay, so where are the servers? Like, excuse me, the sysadmins are quaking. Like, I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, this metaphor doesn't work for me. But I love the idea of taking something like that, where it's like, okay, there is an element of truth. Like, we do have chemical signals sent on these mycelium networks, and then just like saying, okay, what if it was literally like the internet, and then like having that for like a magical thing, and that my dream is that like that sparks curiosity in people being like, so what's this whole common mycelium network all about anyway? And then that's all I try to do is bait and switch people into accidentally learning science against their will. Like, haha, you thought these squirrels could teleport across forests? Joke's on you. You're some fungus.
As somebody who has been accused of writing textbooks to cheat people into learning something, I have to agree. This is obviously the correct way of doing this. But because our books aren't games per se, we have to keep a much stricter difference between the realism and the magic, because we are writing very specifically books based on the natural history of our world and based on folklore and the occult history that we have in the real world, which is why we actually make a very specific distinction, which parts of the book are based on actual science and which ones are just the whimsy. And while we always advertise the book as a work of fiction, like, obviously a lot of it is based on science, and we have science editors, and we're trying to be on point with all the science we're putting in the book. But I would feel so uncomfortable talking about the centuries of folklore and ethnobotanical use, for example, for healing, without explaining that this hasn't been actually proven by science, because we don't want to mislead people into avoiding actual medical interventions by healing themselves with crystals. So it's a slightly different situation, and I would absolutely love doing what you're doing with your games. But we have to keep things more separate, just to avoid miscommunication and fooling people into doing something unhealthy.
On the mycologist primer, I'm gonna just rave about it for a second because you can't stop me. But one of the things that we used in our game was the amethyst deceivers. So this is a real mushroom that exists, and it's qualified as a corpse mushroom, which is, sorry, I shouldn't smile that much when I say corpse. It's a corpse mushroom, which is but so they're all different types of fungi who basically, when a decomposing animal matter creates good soil conditions for them to fruit. And so this has created like all this superstition of like, okay, all these mushrooms keep showing up around dead bodies, and there's part of science, and like the amethyst deceiver reacts with ammonia, which is a product of decomposition. So there is real science here, but then you have this extra element in the book where it's like, and they can detect blood and then glow magically, and you're like, it's like, okay, so there is real science. You didn't just pick a random mushroom to give glowing blood-seeking behavior to, but it's like, okay, we all know that they're not like honing beams in real life. I hope it's, at least if you read the book, it's clear. I think that's fun too, where it's like melding the real and surreal together. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, on the melding of the real and surreal together, something you could see in our first campaign on 5GMs. It's a world where there's floating islands and it's a bunch of dragons. It's dragon riders. It's a lot of fun. But if you've ever seen like dragon riding things, I feel like at least if people have done their research or they're just keep getting lucky, there's very rarely other predators in a dragon based world, right? If on a single continent there's the main large predator is the dragon, there's a good chance, and we now have fossil evidence that represents this for dinosaurs with the large theropods, and it was kind of a theory for a long time. It's been getting supported more as we find more smaller fossils. But so a dragon would fill just about every niche in the food chain, pretty much in its entire existence. The small dragons, once they learn how to fly, they're going to hunt smaller birds, the insect-eating birds, the fish-eating birds. They're going to hunt those. As the dragons get larger they're going to hunt rabbits, then they're going to hunt deer, then they're going to hunt elephants. And so it's this thing of there's no space for other predators. And so there was a pretty consistent theory that if a tyrannosaur was in an area, you're not going to find other theropods or other meat-eating dinosaurs, other carnivores in that area, because they've filled pretty much that entire niche. And so it's that blending of the fantasy with the reality. And I think most of the time, reality is stranger than fiction, and it's we see that one animal is taking up an entire ecological niche, and that's insane. And dragons are a perfect example of that, because we all play these games and we all see dragons everywhere, and they're going to eat all the animals in your world all the time. You don't need more. You don't need lions and tigers. You have dragons. And so I think that in our first campaign, you see that. I think we mentioned like deer and like there's fruits and things like that, but you don't really see any other carnivores on the floating islands outside of dragons, because they can fly and they can cover all the niches, which I think is important. And How to Train Your Dragon did it. I don't know. Once again, I don't know if they got lucky doing it or if they had someone on staff who knew that, but I just think it's such a fun way to express your carnivore and your big bad subtly through the ecology of it.
That idea of getting lucky is really interesting as well, though, right? Because it almost speaks to like maybe there is some kind of subtle unconscious knowledge that we have of like predator prey relationships, that like it just makes sense that there wouldn't be other things. Like you don't even question it's so unconscious that you don't even think about including other things. Like I like that idea of like perhaps like human ancestral memory of large predators and prey relationships that we don't really experience anymore, but did for so long, like evolutionarily speaking.
I really like that. And it kind of, okay, so that brings me to one of my next questions, which is as an avid world builder, and I feel like we got a lot of world builders in chat as well as on this call. One thing I think is interesting is I feel like in a lot of people's world building style, we start from humans and then build outwards, right? Versus on this we're like, boo, humans, no, where do they fit in the food chain?
Right at the bottom.
Well, we're talking kaiju world, maybe. I like the idea. I know we'd mentioned this before. You're like, in a kaiju world, kaiju is everything big, and I'm like, it's just humans who are ours. They're kind of like terrifying. But I think this is really interesting because I think taking an ecological perspective on world building is almost a complete reversal from how a lot of people have like traditionally approached this. So like saying, okay, there is a dragon on top of the mountain because there's a village here that leaves offerings to it, and not, okay, well, this climate, what would it support? Maybe this, what would the apex predator be? And then if there were humans living in the region, how would they have to adapt to that is backwards. So I think my question here is, I'm kind of melding two. One, which is, what is like a starting point for world building? Because I feel like when I do it, it's always a bunch of if-then statements that lead to the creation of the cosmos. So, like, what's a starting point that you would suggest to others, or that you've used, or an unexpected one you've had? And how does that kind of integrate with that system thinking?
So I like to, whenever when I was like in my late teens, and I was like the kind of doing the juvenilia white boy poetry thing, which, you know, was a phase I fully went through. And
I'm still writing white boy poetry.
Yeah, because I was one, terrible at writing poetry, two, fully undiagnosed ADHD at that point, and three, just didn't really know what I was doing. I was all like, yeah, free form, freestyle, you know, like no meter, no rhythm, no this. It was just writing words. And around that time, I discovered I was introduced to this kind of French surrealist art movement called Oulipo. And it's the idea of Oulipo is to impose really rigid restrictions on yourself to create, and that encourages your brain to think more deeply. So there's a novel called Eunoia. Each chapter only uses words with a single vowel in. So there's an A chapter, an E chapter, an I, an O, and a U chapter. And it's incredible. And this art movement has really spread out. And there's even Oulipopo now, which is like Oulipo detective fiction, which is really strange. But to cut a long story short, one of the things I try to do now is when I start building a world, I give myself a really rigid restriction and use that to generate try and generate the ideas within that restriction. So what we did with Mapamundi was, one, it needs to be as close to the real world as is humanly possible, but with monsters in it. And monsters in Mapamundi, by the way, are not like that. We're kind of trying to subvert the term monster. Like, they look monstrous, but they're not. They don't act in a monstrous way, in that kind of human-defined sense. But so it had to be close to the real world, as close to the real world as possible, with monsters, and then with a pan-global human society that views killing these monsters or doing them any harm as the ultimate taboo. So how do you build a world in which, and this is coming from the sanctimonious anarchist vegan here, but like, how do you build a world in which animal life is considered to be of equal agency to human life? Like, you know, like, these are non-human persons. So how does the world evolve and human society evolve around these monsters and the impacts that they have on the world and the people in the world? So like, that restriction then leads to this, for me at least, led to this explosion of creativity of like, what do these cultures look like? What do our cultures look like? Because that's what they are. What would our cultures look like if we didn't view animals as an exploitable, expendable resource? And that's where I kind of jumped out at it from.
I like that too, because you're starting from this like ecological prompt of like these monsters, these strange fauna, and then going to, and I don't know what the ethnobotany word is for animals. I'm sure there's one. But like the relationship that humans have with those animals as like the next step. And then from there going to culture. So
Yeah.
I think that's like an interesting, like, from the natural, humans are nature, okay?
Of course.
But like starting from that and then going in that direction, that sounds like a really fun prompt. I'm gonna
It's
put
that
Adam
idea
on
of switching back between human and non-human, or non-human to human, back to non-human, and looking at how both shape one another.
Yeah, totally. And this is my mandatory plug for everyone to read Braiding Sweetgrass, because a thing I will never stop talking about, but specifically talking about humans as nature, as part of the ecosystem. But okay, just because we're talking about monsters and humans, I'm going to put Adam on the spot right away because I know what we've been talking like the giant things is like, how did that prompt come in first, and how is that extending into other aspects of the world building?
Well, so that's actually, I kind of want to come in on the inverse end of what we were just talking about, which is
Go.
building your world with your humans alongside it. And I think that humans, as much as we are nature, we're also cockroaches in the best way. And if obviously, if we want to be fantasy, we could say that the gigantism in dragons is supported through magic, not through low oxygen quality, which gigantism often comes from lower oxygen. So humans wouldn't have been able to live alongside dinosaurs. That's just a fact. The oxygen levels back then, we wouldn't be able to breathe. Dinosaurs could, gigantism. So that issue is a giant issue in fantasy. Again, you could chalk it up to magic. But so when building a sci-fi fantasy world like something with kaijus, you have to think about that. It's like, oh, are my kaijus just big monsters because they're big monsters, or big monsters because they evolved on this planet of big monsters? And so I'm coming to you to say, transplant your humans. Sometimes build your world, build your ecology, because for me, I'm building monster first, right? I was like, I want a game where we have big ass monsters, huge kaiju that are like continent level, like Godzilla, those kinds of things. And in creating a world to support them, you have to create a world that does not support humans growing there. So transplant your humans, have your humans come into this ecology and have them be a threat to it. Sometimes that's the story, right? Especially in like certain narratives. But so in talking about monsters, I'll go back to the gigantism portion of things. A human probably wouldn't be able to breathe in a kaiju world. And so now the humans have to contend with, we have to keep growing our oxygen. We have to keep having oxygen tanks on us, and we have to create little settlements and little places where we can exist that are also being threatened by the kaiju. And so that kind of becomes this moment of contention, because humans often view it as humans versus rather than humans with and as. And so I think that for the way I'm building the world, humans have created these spaces where they feel like they need to defend against the things that they settled on this planet that had kaiju, right? And so again, for me, a lot of times I think it varies on what you're building. So if you're world building with kaiju in mind, you world build a world that supports them, which is a place where there's low oxygen, possibly megafauna, that match the kaiju size. If your kaiju do eat things like that, if not, there's megaflora, and all your kaiju are just brontosaurs but bigger, and there's bigger trees. And so really it just kind of boils down to where you're starting. And then on the verse end, I'm currently prepping for my season of 5 GMs in a Trench Coat. I'm going to be running a game that's really themed around like cryptids and things like that. We're going to get to see some of those things, and building a world based in cryptids, making your cryptids exist alongside your humans is a thing that we can kind of just look back on how. So like, obviously I'm in America. I'm Hispanic and Indigenous, and I can look back on how Indigenous people have revered and seen things or explained away nature and explained these things they've lived alongside for however long. And I can have my cryptids abide by those laws that Indigenous people applied to those things that they ascribe to being cryptids or ascribe to being other kinds of beings. And so for that verse end of world building is abide by the laws of people who had been there before. And I know that we had mentioned a bit of that earlier.
I really like this way of thinking of like, okay, so I started with the prompt of I want kaijus. We're starting from I want kaijus, and then immediately going to, okay, in what kind of environment would they live or like have evolved to exist, and what would they need to support them? And then coming in later, be like, okay, if some sort of humanoid friend is going to be here too, how are they going to have to adapt? Because as like humans, we're supposed to be tropical animals, and yet we have someone in Finland and someone in Canada on the call. So like we adapt, and I think that's often like a very fun like cultural prompt. I think it's hard to overestimate how much our climate and environment has impacted human culture as they form. Okay, yeah. I feel like we've said 100 things now, but Candy or Anna, if you want to add to that.
Actually, the point at which you ended is a perfect jumpstart for what I would like to say, because I usually start with the stories, because folklore and also the historical use of particular pieces of the environment is usually the jumping off point for my imagination to run wild. So I usually start with exactly the connection between humans and the natural world, because my main goal is to open people's eyes to the wonder and amazement that we have all around us, and bring back the appreciation that historically was a big part of humanity. These days, it seems to be rather in smaller circles like this one.
Yeah, nerds. Love you guys.
Yay, hyperfixations. So this is usually where I start, because if you look at the humanity from the historical perspective, we have always partook in the world and obviously created very complex relationships, both on the physical and metaphysical level, with everything that surrounds us, which brought all the thousands and thousands of stories and legends and superstitions. So this is usually my starting point. For example, Jakub and I were working on an upcoming RPG, which is like this 16th century solar punk, but in a space so deep it's basically an ocean. And there we're crafting this very complex ecosystem based on the superstitions of people who are trying to survive in it. Because just like actually Adam said, we brought in humans into already existing ecosystem, and they are just trying to survive, and it's not easy.
Yeah.
So this is where we're starting, and I think it's a very good starting point for looking at the ecosystems exactly from this human perspective, which is for many players the easiest to embrace, because this is our natural starting point as humans. Not that we all have to belong to that race, but we'll see. All the Fae in the chat.
So for Confluence, it really does depend on the game and what you're starting with, I think. Because for Confluence, there was already a lot of existing information. Our product owner hired a team to work on this game that they had been working on since they were a teenager. So for that one, since there was so much information, we actually had to parse all of that information and then sort of just boil it down to, okay, what are we looking at here?
That's great though. That's like finding something in an archive and building a world out of it. Like I love that.
Yeah.
An archive?
Exactly.
A living archive.
Exactly. And we've got pretty much free reign to update, change, take out stuff as needed. So like going back to the archive thing and having the game sort of being a living archive and the in-world books being written by archivists, that's something that came from our team, and not the product owner. And because the world is so huge, it's really hard to kind of find like a decent starting place. And so I think what we ended up doing though is kind of starting off with the different eras of the world. There's 14 eras of Confluence, and people, places, and things from each era are pulled into one era. And so you've got, like the very first few eras are all like Big Bang type stuff and all that stuff. So you've got that stuff coming in, and then you've got people that aren't necessarily as technologically advanced coming in with people that are very much advanced, because the era that they're coming into is sort of in the middle. It's era 9 out of the 14. And so we actually had to start off with what those eras and what was being pulled from those eras, and then how they interact in era 9 Confluence. And so we got a lot into like the different lineages, the cultures and stuff, and how they mesh and match the ecologies and stuff that are being pulled in. It's like, okay, is this going to work together? Because you've got technology fungus, and then you've got regular fungus, and then you've got so all these things. It was a lot of work to actually put all of that stuff together into into one world. Now, like for me personally, I have a game that I'm working on myself, and for me, it was actually more what Anna said. Is I'm thinking about the stories and the folklore and stuff because it's an urban fantasy game, and so for that one, it starts off with the folklore and stories, and then it's like, okay, so how do humans um, interact with these mythical creatures? And so, yeah, really does depend on the game.
And just from this conversation, I think part of what draws me to this style of game and story and world building is that how strong and interesting the internal logic to the fiction is.
Mhm.
So even if we start from a place of like, okay, this magical thing happened, there was a magical form of a Big Bang and it created these 3 streams of magic or whatever. But then after that point, we follow this sort of logic that reflects a real world logic. And I think
Mhm.
that I find that interesting, and it's like such a good prompt because I feel like you could just keep building forever of like,
Mhm.
if that, then this, if this apex predator has cornered this part of this thing and there's no other guys, what does that mean? Are there going to be squirrels? Because if there's nothing around that would hunt, like, if it's like, I think that's really, really fun to do that. And the word solar punk was thrown around a few times there, and I'm like, one of my favorite things that I won't shut up about. And I think that's interesting because whenever we're talking about this kind of like logic, sometimes, and a lot of these games kind of like they're between fantasy and sci-fi. They just have that
Mhm.
magical element to them, but they have the kind of like logic and explanations that we more expect from like a sci-fi setting. But often they're also just kind of like past coded instead of future coded. And I think the solar punk genre is like an optimistic future coding that's more hard science typically, but
No.
that's a really fun melding of these universes. Okay, I have one more question that's just coming from me and my heart, and then we're going to open the floor to audience questions. Audience, if you would like to submit a question, you can do so there's a form that's being linked in chat. Because I feel like no one would ever let me live it down if I didn't ask you very specifically about fungi. Because that's what I care about more than anything. I think even in our world, and like, because I talk to people about mushrooms a lot, there is a lot of folklore and mysticism and fear and confusion and mystery around like fungus, mushrooms,
Mhm.
things like that. And then also fungal horror being a whole genre that exists and that I personally adore, even though it's not doing anything great for like mushroom PR, which I'm like, okay, go read Annihilation and then read Entangled Life. Okay, you got to do both at the same time. But I wanted to specifically ask, we talked about the MiFi network, about how like fungi played to the worlds and how in our world building, we can kind of play off those real world sentiments, leverage them, or try to counteract them on all the different creative ways we can interact with mushrooms and other fungi in these fictional settings.
I can start us off really quickly. I want to kick it off by saying, feed your trees, feed your fungi, right? They're things that not consume in a bad way, but consume. And so there was recently the trees were dying at American National Forest because there weren't enough bears and there wasn't enough trout and salmon in the water. And the bears eat the trout and salmon and leave the corpses, which feeds the fungi in the trees, right? And so we know that we need to feed our fungi. And so sometimes I think a fun way of seeing this is like if you're in a world, I know I've used it in my home campaign where you have fungi zombies. We've seen them all over the place. We've seen The Last of Us, right? And there's the ants that get, I don't know the actual name of the ants. I'm sure someone here. There you go. I know someone here knows the fungi that gets the ants. But so they do this to eat, right? And so don't just have a scary zombie that is also a mushroom. Maybe there was a war here, and this is a battlefield that has continuous wars. There's some places that more wars are fought than others, and now there's an abundance of magical cordyceps or things like that. And so find the way in which you're feeding that layer, in my opinion. And that's kind of the biggest thing for like the fungi on my end.
Okay, this is going to be hard for me to leave everyone up space, but just one thing is this is one thing that I really love that I'm seeing a lot more of in like fantastical things is not having all mushrooms as decomposers.
Yeah.
That we're seeing more like mycorrhizal, parasitic mushrooms in fiction instead of just only decomposers, which I'm like, yay! Okay, as you were.
All right. So for Confluence, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about our funguses and things. So we have a couple of lineages that are symbiotic with funguses and molds and things like that. So one of them is our goblins. So they're actually like covered in like funguses and molds, and they have to actually they got to take care of their fungus. Otherwise, it will make them sick. And so, yeah, it's I think they're really cool. They're because they are like can grow the funguses and stuff. They have an ability. It's called jelly blooded, and so that's the reason why they're actually able to like grow these funguses. Um, the other one that we have is called the Win, and they are very much just living like sentient fungus. And so they're the ones that can actually communicate without technology over the MiFi network. They just where they live tends to cause like overgrowth. It actually like grows like plants and things. So they get this megafauna and flora. And then but also they have an ability to actually help decompose things quickly, and that's something that they can do on purpose. And it's just something that is sort of innate with them. So if they find like a corpse or something, they can actually help it to decompose faster. So they've got a lot of abilities that actually do come from like IRL, like fungus and stuff.
I love the idea of the animal in symbiosis
Mhm,
with the fungus, like the goblin,
mhm.
because for anyone who doesn't know, 90% of land plants require symbiotic fungi to like live. Plants need fungus. They will die without the fungus, except for broccoli and that whole brassica family. I don't know what they're up to. Kind of sus, honestly. Why they got so many plants in the same species? I don't know. They mind their business over there. And orchids don't actually. Orchids are the. We can talk about orchids another time. No, mycoheterotrophs are not allowed. But I do think it's really fun to take that and kind of extend it to be like, what if it was humanoids who had that same kind of relationship?
Mhm.
Super neat.
It's actually really interesting because in the game, like we try to make sure lineages don't have like any special powers because of that's who they are or abilities. And so like any of the lineages that can actually become jelly blooded. So even like the humans can become like jelly blooded. And so, you'll see a bunch of different lineages growing funguses and stuff on themselves.
Cool.
There is actually, in the game that we're working on with Jakub currently, there is a whole kinship, because we don't do races. There's a kinship called Triveni, who are in fact living in a very symbiotic relationship with the great mycelium. And the mycelium has basically infiltrated the whole blown up moon, upon which was the biggest ever library and an archive. And now all the Triveni who are worshipping the mycelium are creating a giant trade and information network throughout the whole universe. Because the
Cool.
mycelium is not here just to, decompose everything. The mycelium is there to share information and support people, and also create a giant trade empire. It's a bit of a honey fungus.
I was gonna say, I'm like, Amalaria has entered the chat. God, it's so funny. Every time you guys talk about your projects, I'm like, this is for me specifically, actually.
Oops.
I choose
Okay,
to believe we've been separated at birth. Yes.
I know. Okay, I have some questions here from chat. Thank you so much for those who submitted it. And I think this one's really interesting. As a writer, there's often the urge to keep exploring and explaining the worlds we create, to explain with excitement with this gesture, like what we've learned. How do you work out when to have that balance in the ecological world designed, explained without going fully down the rabbit hole, and still have an abundance of information or readers to fascinate over? I think I want to bring this up specifically because I know a lot of the games we're talking about are built around exploration. It's not all the information is available up front, and so as both a game designer and also a game runner, because that's one thing I struggle with as a GM, where I'm like, and look at this cool thing I made for you. The doors are locked. I have a PowerPoint presentation. So like, how do you balance that of like maintaining that excitement, that deep dive, and then kind of like leaving an element of mystery, of co-world building, and also discovery and exploration?
So this is really, really vital for Mapamundi, especially for a game that has a subtitle, an exploration and ecology RPG. Like, it's really, really important and has been right from the start. So from the writing perspective, what we have done is chosen to spread our information. There's a huge amount of information, but it's spread in various different kind of sections of the book. So each of our 10 regions for the core rule book, which covers kind of Eurasia and North Africa, each of the 10 regions has its own 10-page regional guide, which has a history, a geography, and a culture section. And obviously in that geography section, we're giving you the kind of broad strokes of the landscapes, but we also have the journey deck, which is 36 tarot-sized cards, each featuring its own landscape. And rather than providing a bestiary, so our kind of bestiaries are in those regional guides, we have provided a cardiary, which we were quite happy with the name of the cardiary. And so each card, each of those landscapes has its own page in the rule book where its artwork is featured in full. And then 4 of the regions, we give information about that landscape in 4 of the 10 regions. So a mountain, plains, grasslands, salt marshes, forests, streams, rivers, all the good stuff. And so we seed a lot of our kind of ecological explanations in there, but they're there to be found rather than spoon-fed to you as the GM and as the players. And so the book is trying to replicate the same sense of exploration that the players are going on, allowing you to explore the book to find this information. And then from a game design perspective, the thing that's central to Mapamundi is this mechanic that we call shaping. Now, everyone here will have done this around a table. Everyone will have added a detail to something that a GM has mentioned. In Mapamundi, that's the core mechanic in the game. It's named, it's called shaping, and the idea is that a significant amount of narrative control is being given over to the characters, to the players. They are the ones building the world on the framework that the GM, which we call the narrator, has established, using the information that we have seeded throughout the book. So if they do get hyper fixated on like, oh, how do the grasslands work in this region or this area of this region, the players tell you as the narrator how the grasslands work. They tell you what plants are there, what birds are there. When they reveal monster behaviors, they tell you how they manifest. So that exploration is collaborative as well. Like, everyone is exploring all the time, and it's this collaborative world building process. So rather than giving things, you give people enough rope to hang themselves with, is the phrase that we use in Essex, which is here in the UK for anyone who doesn't know. Give people just enough rope to hang themselves with, and you're letting their creativity go. Instead of giving them too much information and bogging them down in it, give them just enough to let their imagination go.
Yeah. And so, okay, so it sounds like you actually break up the information like organizationally in the way it's given to both the narrator and then the players.
Yeah.
And then also you get around me boarding up the windows, locking the door, and having a PowerPoint presentation, because the players also have PowerPoint presentations that they can use at any time, metaphorically speaking.
And actually they're the ones kind of leading that process, really. The narrator is there to facilitate and respond and plant those seeds and let the players grow the garden.
Plant the seeds, hey. Just a little botanical humor for y'all. Okay, yeah. Anyone else has thoughts on how to not to leave room when you're this excited and want to build world?
Yeah. So for Confluence, it's set up in a very specific way that allows the players to also introduce things on their own. So I mentioned earlier that the settings guide is actually in world. It is written by archivist in world, and then there's another 200 pieces of ephemera, postcards, letters, pictures, just little like scribbles in the atlas that will sometimes either agree or contradict what the archivist has talked about. And so this book is meant to be in the player character's hands and not just the player or the story leader's hands. And so you actually have the full world there. And we want you to add your own pieces of ephemera to it as well. Like you can draw in the margins and say, oh, hey, we met this person. And you know what? They're a little suspicious. I'm not too sure I like them. And so you can like just add to it on your own. And it just makes it so easy to do that. Because it is in world. And so you just keep building the world on top of what we've built.
That's that's really cool. I like this kind of like sharing and like I feel like smart people always use the word diegetic, and I feel like that's what
yeah,
this
that's
is.
that's what we use.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm like, I know things too. Me, a person who can read books. I'm like, that's a very fun way of going about it. I wanted to ask, specifically for with like something like sorry, Anna, I'm putting you on the spot, because I know with these like the supplements, like the naturalist library and things, often you're just giving the supplement to the GM and it's like go forth. And I know when I've been using it in the past, I've used it just like as like a roll table almost of just like flip, this is what you found, or just like pulling elements. But do you have like thoughts on how those kinds of tools can be used in storytelling and how it can avoid the PowerPoint phenomenon?
Well, I personally avoid the PowerPoint phenomenon by having a very strained relationship with my layout artist, who is me. So I have given myself one page to write about every species, and that's it. Because if I write too much, it's my problem to cut it down anyway. So this is my side of the thing. And from the other direction, actually, this is something that the followers and the supporters of our first book came up with, which is why we have the flashcards that are included in every of the book projects, which allow people to very easily introduce just a minimal amount of information with a picture, with just like short description, short listing of any potential magical or ornamental or medicinal qualities, and that's it. If you can give that card to the player because they found something, and if they are interested, they can look for it further. You can just tell them they found some aconite, give them a little card, they can look at the picture, say, oh, how pretty. And if that's their ceiling of interest, then that's it, that's fine. They can continue playing, just engaging with the mechanics, and not fall in the rabbit holes that have been dug before. If they want to fall into the rabbit holes, that's their life, and we should never stop them.
I think it's interesting that like cards have come up now twice as like part of it is literally this, because I'm thinking like as a GM, how do I stop it? But even as like a designer, you can actually create material to make it more, because like that, as much as I love the system level thinking of ecological design, being able to break it down to those little pieces is tricky because I'm the person, I'm like, and then also everything, and then the world. To describe this mushroom, I must first invent the universe. So I think having it in these design elements that breaks it into like smaller components, either discovering one piece at a time, a card at a time, things like that, and then having the player and the GM as a player as well put them together as themselves is really fun. They have like a sort of collaborative fiction between the writer and the players. Very fun. I love this. Yeah. Adam, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I feel like you guys hit like absolutely amazing points, and I think at least for right now, the breadth of what in terms of world building from what I've released or created that you can go and see online is running games. And so I kind of that's the biggest thing, is that it's so incredibly difficult to create a world where you don't over explain it. And so sometimes I think, well, one thing I've done is create a base ecology, the basics of it. And I know that these kinds of things might exist here, but then as the players go through it, you kind of allow them. And this is a thing that I've done solely because we run an AP and we play live, and like and I've been on streams and things like that. And so this is something that it's combining my relative knowledge of like ecology and flora and fauna and those things, and obviously dinosaurs that I've talked about a lot here, and the fossil records. Those are interesting to me. That like level of archaeology and paleontology, those things I think really build up your ecology. And so start there, give yourself a fossil record, and then let your players go wild. And you know that this ecology you set them off in can support megafauna or can't support it, and instead there's going to be a lot of small critters, or maybe it's an insect filled area. And I think it's one of those things that let your players kind of lead the way sometimes, as difficult as it might be.
And I think that actually answers the other question we had, is like, what do you do when players fixate on like a little thing that you hadn't thought through? Like you're like, and then there's a flower, and they're like, I want to know everything about this flower. But it's like, if you've kind of set that base where you're like, okay, we have a base ecology, we have a logic of the world, and then on the fly, and if you're on your live AP, you are on the fly. There's no breaking to go Google it. You're like, and the answer is no. You can kind of like slot that logic into the world, or co-create it with the players, depending on the kind of system you're using. Some systems allowed for a bit more shared narrative control than others. And we're all for using all different systems here. You guys are not going to believe this. It's been an hour that we've been yapping. So I know, because I'm like, let's go again, another hour.
Yeah, I mean, I've got time for another hour, right? It's only midnight.
It's only midnight. I'm only dragging you out here from the other side of the world in the middle of the night. On that note, I would love it if we could do a quick sign off and tell us, like, for example, if you have a project with only a few hours left in it, what that is, where people could go, how they can find you, if they are charmed and enamored by you, where they can find more of your work. And I'm going to go the opposite direction this time. Okay, counterclockwise. And so, Adam, I'm going to start with you. Hey, who are you? Where can we find you?
Howdy, I'm Adam. I don't have anything coming out within the next 4 hours that you have to go do right now. And I advise, if someone here does, you should go to it right away. Go to the link. But I'm Adam. I'm over at 5GMs in a Trench Coat and Adavan's Armory. We do a lot of 5e supplemental content, and then also actual play work. Recently, or actually today, we just released our first episode of 5GM's test table, where we test out different games for people. So if you want to come by and check that out, and send us... the game we tested was, oh my goodness, I'm terrible remembering names. It's a Model UN game. It was
I've heard about this one.
Yeah, it dropped. Yeah, it was gearing up to drop, and it just dropped today. So we coincided our release. We're doing a little giveaway, so you can go check that out. But it was a lot of fun. If you want us to play games, we're doing a lot of that. So message us, hit us up. We'll play test a 1-shot, 2 games maybe. It's a great time. But yeah, come check us out.
And Chad is saying it's Model Our Nations by Eric Silver. That's the game for anyone who's like, wow, that's cool. And if you want to know more about that game, go to 5, like the number, gmsinatrenchcoat.com, and then you can see them playing it. Okay, up next we have Anna.
Yes, hi, it's been me, Anna. You can always find everything we're making on doubleproficiency.com, which is Jakub's and my website. I think our Kickstarter for the Ecologies primer has ended, but there are 2 days left for late pledges. So if you want to learn more about magical fungi, you can. It's gonna be fun.
If you want to, okay, hey team, Do you know how hard it is to find good information about mushroom folklore as a person who is me and wants to know everything? Do you know how much work and research goes into it? Do you know the archives, like the multilingual archives that you have to go through to find this kind of ethnomycology information? And it is in a beautiful, readable, one-page layout, stunning book. And you have 48 hours from this exact moment. Go right now and buy it. And you know what? If you're seeing this in the future, go buy it anyway. It's probably at a store now. It's probably a bestseller. But you can be like, I knew her when. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Thank
I told
you,
you, I'm
Anne.
shameless.
Thank you, Anne. You do way better job than I do when promoting our stuff. So thank you.
Anytime. Okay, up next we have Candy.
Hello. Yes, I'm Candy Williams. I am the Lore QA lead, aka Lorca, trying to make that happen. For Confluence the Living Archive, I've been working on it for 3 whole years, and we've got 3 whole hours left of the Backer Kit campaign. So definitely check it out. We are doing in about 2.5 hours. We'll be going live, and maybe watch out check out the pledge levels and the add-ons. There might be some interesting discounts popping up at the end. So yeah, definitely check us out. You can also I also do my own games. You can find those on Candy Janine, KNDIJEANNE, itch.io.
Amazing. Now, quick question: where are you going to be going live? If they're like, we want
yes.
more
I'm
Candy
sorry.
right now.
It is on the Backer Kit and also on our
Right.
YouTube. But yeah, if you go to the Backer Kit page, it's embedded there, and you can check out the live stream from there as well.
And as we've been saying, there's like what, 3 hours now
3
left
hours
in this.
left.
Y'all, it's a game that is ecological, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, and includes, for all my information nerds, a living archive. Information professionals have taken over the world as they should have years ago. And you get to discover ephemera, and which is like little pieces of information, like paper that you aren't usually stored long term. That's what ephemera is. And as well as you discover this sort of like magical, thoughtful, creative, fantastical world in all these different environments. So go check that out immediately.
Yes, check it
I'm
out.
watching you. I'm in your walls. Okay. And last but so certainly not least, we have George.
Hi everyone, I'm George, studio lead at 3 Cell Studios here in Manchester in the UK. We are gearing up to release Mapper Monday, an exploration and ecology RPG. After you've gone to back Confluence, and after you've gone to look at double proficiency stuff, and after you've gone to 5 GMs in a trench coat, all of which you should do. Please get yourself over to mappermondayrpg.com. So that's Mapper is MAPPA, and then Monday is MUNDI. mappermondayrpg.com. Sign up to the mailing list, take a look over there, download the pre-release guide. It's available, pay what you want on DriveThruRPG. It's a silver bestseller despite being pay what you want, which is incredibly strange and really, really lovely.
Awesome.
But yeah, we're releasing the game in February on Kickstarter. It will be 100% finished, and we're looking for a nice quick turnaround. So the idea is that the book and the cards and the nice box it all comes in will be in people's hands by the middle of next year. mappermondayrpg.com. I really hope you enjoy what you see.
And if y'all came here because you saw Strange Ecologies as the title, it's an ecology RPG. It's a game about
It's in the title.
It's in the name, y'all. It's for you, okay? It's for you specifically. So go. You already identified yourself as the prime demographic by watching this much of this show. So trust me, it's for you. And again, you can get that preview so that when it comes out, you can be like, oh yeah, that bestseller, I already know because I'm cool and hip and know these fantastic games. And then extra last but not least, I want to do a huge thanks to Science and Sorcery, who is producing this behind the scenes. A disembodied phantom and modding in chat, an external brain cell for me who is busy frothing at the mouth and rattling the bars of my enclosure. If you enjoy this kind of, anytime we deal with the intersection of science and fantasy, I really highly recommend you check out Science and Sorcery. They are scienceandsorcery.com or right on here on Twitch, and you can watch all these games that kind of mix science education with fantasy shenanigans, and yeah, you'll love them. Trust me. And you know what? They're in chat with a big sword next to them. So just click that. You've made it this far. And on that note, I get to plug myself, which is that I'm a TTRPG creator and actual play producer. I'm currently in the process of recording and releasing an actual play called Wayward Autumnal, which is a pastoral horror game based off the game we're playing Under the Autumn Strangely. I say it's like a true horror version of Over the Garden Wall. Like if we leaned real dark, but it takes place in this magical, strange forest that with shifting landscape that has a strange internal logic to it and draws on a lot of the inspirations that we've talked about here today. If that sounds like something you are into and you also like horror, please, if you're like, I like the fun goblin vines but hate horror, it's not for you. But if you like horror, it is. The first chapter is currently up on YouTube, and chapter 2 will be airing next week right here on Twitch. And on that note, friends, we are done. Thank you so much, chat, for coming in, for participating, for leaving your questions. It's been a delight. And we hope to see you around soon for our next panel. What will it be on? Solarpunk, horror, librarians in TTRPG. We'll find out. Okay. Goodbye, friends.
Bye.